Pre nekako dotakli smo se ove teme sa torrentima, mislim da smo ih spominjali kada smo pričali o Adobovim programima, takođe u vezi skidanja filmova, a sada ćemo u ovom videoklipu videti kako su torrenti propali i kako danas koristi jako mali broj ljudi naspram nekog perioda u prošlosti kada se koristilo nenormalno puno. Da vidimo kako je došlo do pada torrenata, šta kaže u ovom videozapisu, idemo sada odmah.
In 2006, 70% of all internet traffic was torrenting, the primary way for people to pirate songs, movies, and video games. Yet today, it's barely a percentage of the internet. How did torrenting become so popular, and how did it die out? In the late 90s, internet traffic was booming, as was internet speeds. Most users had left dial-up internet for broadband, moving from 50 kilobits per second to...
Kad se setim na 50 kilobajta po sekundi na dial-upu kad sam skidao muziku, bože ti sačuvaj, sećam se, skidao sam određene pesme, neke novitete koji su izlazili, pa šta god mi padne na pamet, napravim spisak i onda tokom noći ostavim nekoliko komada pa se molim Bogu da mi se skine u nekoliko sati. Tu potrošim interneta, nabiflam račun samo tako, ali kad se skine ta jedna pesma koju sam želeo, onda je radost nevjerovatno ujutro. Zamislite, pesmu jednu sam skidao nekoliko sati. Danas jednu pesmu skine za sekund. Danas možemo toliko brzo da skinemo mnogo velike fajlove na internetu da je to jednostavno ne može da se poredi sa nekadašnjim metodom skidanja. Ja sam iz tog perioda doživao sam svašta, doživao sam procvat tehnologije i zaista nekako mi je drago što sam sve to doživeo i još uvek doživljavam, tehnologija stalno napreduje. Uvek je tehnologija napredovala, ali u ovom mom životnom periodu je krenulo toliko brzo sve da se odvija, sve brže i brže i brže, da prosto ne mogu da verujem da se nalazimo u ovom dobu veštačke inteligencije trenutno. Znači to, kad sam bio klinac, kontao sam da će biti realno jednoga dana da imamo sve to, kao što je bilo u igricama, kao što je bilo u Deus Exu igrici. I stvarno je krenulo sve ka tome, samo nisam verovao da ću ja to doživeti i to tako rano, ali evo, tu smo, nevjerovatno.
Over 1 megabit per second, or 20 times the speed. This leap forward opened a world of possibilities.
To je tad bilo, sad još
no
gore.
longer took
Mislim,
minutes
još
to
bolje.
load an image or download a song, but seconds.
Da, to je to što sam sad
there was a
pričao.
problem. People wanted to download songs and movies, but couldn't.
Ma kakvi? I onda smo preko raznih programa smo skidali sve te stvari. Sad ne mogu ni da se setim koje su sve imena bila, ali znam da li je bila Šareaza, da li je bila Emule se zvao program jedan, pa onda neki program je bio da li Kaza ili tako nešto. Bilo je nekoliko tih programa koje smo koristili, na raznorazne načine su funkcionisali, sad ne mogu ni da se setim svačijeg imena i koja je procedura skidanja fajlova u tom programu bila. Neki su bili na neke fajlove, na neke linkove, neki su bili na torrente i onda je polako zaživeo i taj Pirate Bay i ostali sajtovi sa torrentima. Na kraju smo imali bukvalno torrent search engine, to se sećam, bukvalno odeš na sajt i otkucaš kao u Google-u šta ti treba i on ti izbaci gomilu torrenta sa svih strana i imao si raznih opcija od koga hoćeš da skidaš, kako hoćeš da skidaš, kojom brzinom, svega je bilo. I onda jedanput svi ti silni sajtovi su samo nestali. Ti ljudi koji su držali neke od tih sajtova, znam da su imali toliko ogromne zamkove, vozni park, pun automobila raznih tipova, nema šta nisu imali. Ljudi su bili jedni od najbogatijih ljudi na planeti i znam da su ih polako počeli hapsiti za raznorazne stvari i kažem, samo su nestali svi. Danas jako malo sajtova ima gde možete naći torrent, pouzdanih sajtova gde možete naći torrent, a da ne zaradite neku viruščinu ili ko zna šta.
There was no Netflix or Disney Plus, and iTunes was barely getting off the ground. These services allow us to access music, movies, games, and everything else.
Ovo je novotarija za mene, čoveče. Ovo je sad skoro došlo. Pre Steama igrice su se igrale sa torrenata. Kakvi Steamovi, kakve gluposti, šta je s vama?
Else super easily and legally. But back then, before the spread of centralized servers and systems, the internet was more like the Wild West. Companies didn't know how to service or monetize it. So out of this void came peer-to-peer. Imagine you and thousands of others wanted to listen to a new song online. but there was no easy way to do it. There was no website you could go to and just stream from it.
Dobro, to jeste. Što se tiče muzike, sada je mnogo bolja situacija. Barem što se tiče preslušavanja. Znači, šta znam, mesečno da se uplati neki taj subscription i imate celu biblioteku svih pesama na ovoj planeti, bukvalno. Šta god pomislite, možete da nađete, nema nikakvih problema. Jedino problem sad što imamo taj copyright zakon, pa ne možemo svašta raditi sa tom muzikom i nekako više ta muzika nije ni zanimljiva kao što je bila ranije. Ranije smo je koristili za svašta nešto. Pogotovo ja u svom poslu editinga koristili smo sve vrste muzike, komercijalne i one koje nisu. Nije bilo ovakvih pravila tada. Ali tada se mnogo teže dolazilo do muzike. Posle su nastajali neki sajtovi koji su malo bolje organizovali te fajlove, pa si mogao da skidaš malo lakše, onako grupno više pesama odjedanput ili više albuma, sve onako lepo po diskografiji složeno. Ali ni to nije dugo potrajalo. Nakon što su došli novi copyright zakoni, sve to moralo da nestane. Tako da sad imamo ove iTunes i Spotify i šta već nemamo i sad slušamo muziku na taj način.
Instead, someone had to rip it from a CD and decide to use a peer-to-peer platform.
When you connect, you're downloading music from another Napster user's machine, and the software, the programs, the music never resides on Napster's equipment.
Here, the user would seed the file for others on a platform like Napster. They aren't uploading the file. Instead, they're allowing you to download the song directly from their computer. Then, with the file on your computer, you could seed it for others. The more seeders, the easier it was to download it. Peer-to-peer made it easy for pirated songs and movies to spread like wildfire. Platforms like Napster, LimeWire, and BitTorrent began appearing, and soon they all had millions of users. The internet in the 2000s really was a different place. It seemed like everyone was pirating. All of this was obviously illegal, and it was a bit annoying to do, with all kinds of viruses hiding in the CD.
To jeste, za regularnog nekog korisnika koji je hteo da skine torrent, ovo jeste bio problem. Ukoliko ne znam šta radi, mi smo isto morali biti pažljivi kad se skida. Nekad je bilo frka otvoriti torrent. Bilo je situacija kada se skidala neka video igrica ili neki software za rad ili tako nešto, pa nikad ne znaš šta se nalazi unutra, da li je virus, da li nije. A znate kakvi su antivirusi? Odmah čim vide nešto upakovano, nešto šifrovano, krekovano, odmah prijavljuje kao virus i mnogi su se plašili toga zapravo. Mi koji smo se razumeli, znali smo da prepoznamo da li je zaista virus ili nije. A nekad nismo ni mi znali, pa ceo kompjuter i šta ćeš drugo, moraš da reinstaliraš i svašta radiš. Tako da nije bilo baš zgodno. Ali to nam je bio jedini način realno da pogledamo nešto, da odigramo nešto ili da koristimo neki software. Mi para za sve te zezancije nismo imali. I to bi bilo to.
Files. But that didn't stop people. It was easy enough for it to catch on. Industries like film and music had never seen such widespread copyright infringement, and it was only getting worse. Torrenting had taken off. Its size was unbelievable. By 2006, 70% of the internet was peer-to-peer file sharing. People no longer needed to buy CDs for songs. They could torrent them and then export them to an MP3 player.
U stvari čak je bila situacija, a zašto bi uopšte ja čuvao na hard disku bilo kakvu muziku ili bilo šta kad ima na internetu, mogu da skinem kad god hoću da pogledam. Onda kad su došli ti copyright zakoni, onda je bilo gotovo, onda više nije bilo skidanja tek tako, ono ko je skinuo šta, to je imao i kraj. Danas se živi sasvim drugačije. To hoću da kažem, da se tada toliko koristio torrent, da smo mislili da jednostavno to će biti uvek tako i uvek ćemo imati pristup svemu tome i ekstra. Nikad nismo ni razmišljali da nećemo imati tu mogućnost. Ali dobro.
Users, but it was costing copyright holders everything. The Motion Picture Association of America lost over $2.3 billion in potential revenue thanks to internet piracy, most of which came from peer-to-peer. Artists saw their new songs and albums leaked and downloaded it. And it wasn't just artists who did. The global entertainment industry as a whole had been changed forever, and copyright holders needed to take action.
To je to, početak kraja.
The first instinct of media companies was to chase down the platform owners. These were the big peer-to-peer platforms, because if they were shut down, users wouldn't be able to pirate files. At least, that's what they thought. One of the first peer-to-peer platforms was Napster, and it naturally became one of their first targets.
Naravno.
Legal troubles over copyright infringement aren't slowing down Napster. The song-swapping company is now in the top 50 list of most visited sites on the web, according to Media Metrics.
But Napster made one fatal mistake. While the company did not host any songs themselves, they used a centralized server to organize these pirated files. And unfortunately for them, this gave law enforcement an easy target. Napster was sued for tens of millions by copyright holders, including A&M Records and even Metallica. Yet, during the lawsuits, something unexpected happened. These lawsuits had given Napster a lot of publicity. Even more people began signing up, rising to a peak of 80 million users. Not only that, existing users began downloading as much as they could before the platform disappeared. After countless lawsuits and payouts, Napster filed for bankruptcy in September of 2002. And soon, other cases began to spring up, the most notable of which was the Recording Industry Association of America, or the RIAA, suing LimeWire on behalf of record labels. They alleged that LimeWire had cost the music industry a ridiculous $75 trillion.
Da, jeste, koštalo je đavola, ali nisu uzimali u obzir recimo da su ljudi skidali sve što su mogli da skinu, bukvalno i što im je trebalo i što nije trebalo. Mnogo ljudi je skidalo muziku samo zbog arhive, da ima u svojoj arhivi muzičku arhivu jednostavno. Što ne znači da od svih tih silnih pesama i albuma mi bismo kupovali sve te stvari isto tako na disku. Ne, to ne znači. Možda bi kupio nešto što bi voleo da slušam u svoje slobodno vreme i tako nešto. Mislim sad ono tipa ja u arhivi imam od Eminema sve živo ili tako nešto. Ja Eminema ne podnosim, ne slušam ga, nikad ne bi kupio njegov album. To je taj primer koji hoću da vam dam u suštini, da vam bude jasno o čemu pričam. Tako da ovaj broj od 75 milijardi dolara nije mi ubedljiv nikako.
Next, the GDP of the entire planet at the time was 59 trillion. Naturally, the court labeled this as absurd. RIAA then pushed for $50 billion in damages, and eventually a final settlement of $105 million was reached. But this was just the beginning. Copyright owners soon realized how difficult the battle against piracy was.
If they think Napster's bad, I can tell you there's a lot worse coming. You know, there's software that is untraceable just around the corner.
Whenever authorities closed down one platform, 3 more appeared. Users simply migrated to the new platforms and continued their illegal downloads elsewhere.
I dan danas je tako, samo mnogo manje količine.
Future platforms became decentralized and harder to track down, and the lawsuits were getting longer and longer. While it took Napster a couple of years to be shut down, torrent platforms like LimeWire were active for 10. Similarly, it took authorities a decade to finally arrest the last Pirate Bay founder, and even when they did, the website continued to exist. Some copyright holders and artists tried a more devious, malicious tactic. If they couldn't shut down torrenting legally, they would kill it from the inside. In 2003, Madonna intentionally leaked her latest album, American Life, onto file-sharing platforms. Except, it wasn't really her music. To a user browsing and torrenting, the songs might seem up to par.
Ovo se isto često dešavalo, znači mučim se da skinem neku pesmu i na kraju ta pesma bude neki miks refrena ili neka glupost koja nema veze sa tom pesmom. To se dešavalo.
But the tracks contained no music, just Madonna saying, "What the F do you think you're doing?" This was called torrent poisoning. It would make the data less reliable, and it would give some users a good scare. Perhaps enough to stop them from torrenting further. And it wasn't just artists who did it either. HAL Laboratory intentionally leaked their latest video game, Earthbound. To a user who downloaded it, everything seemed normal at first, but as the game went on, the difficulty grew rampantly, far more than normal. Not only that, near the end of the game, the copy would freeze, and when the player rebooted, they would see all of their progress had been deleted.
Kakva je brate mili. No, za ovo nisam znao. Znači, igrica postaje nepodnošljivo sve teža i teža tokom progresa i na kraju ti se zamrzne i obriše ti sve save-ove, sve jedno. Maltretiranje.
But even with all the lawsuits and the torrent poisoning, things weren't working. Torrenting was still only growing. So organizations like RIAA tried a scare tactic next. While going after the platform owners, they also began to sue the users. tens of thousands of users received lawsuits for illegally downloading music. College students found themselves charged with absurd charges. Jamie Thomas, a single mother of two, was found liable for $222,000 in damages for sharing 24 songs on Kazaa.
Sam dobro rekao bio, ne znam ni šta sam rekao na početku, valjda Kazar sam rekao, šta sam rekao? Eto, viš da se sećam ja stvari nekih.
Scare off a lot of users, but created even more problems. RIAA had been forcing internet service providers to hand over user data on a technicality, Digital Millennium Copyright Act. If they suspected someone of copyright infringement, an ISP had to hand over this data without the approval of a judge. With that came an abuse of power. RIAA began sending thousands of lawsuits to users even vaguely connected to the platforms. For example, Sarah Ward, a grandmother, was sued for using the Windows-only Kazaa software to download hardcore rap music, except she only owned a Macintosh computer. Eventually, all of that did change. In 2003, a judge ruled that the Digital Millennium Copyright Act gave RIAA no right to request user data from ISPs. RIAA was unlawfully casting wide nets to catch users. Moving forward, RIAA would need to conduct its efforts under the supervision of a judge. This brought their crusade against users to a halt. So copyright holders tried yet another tactic. Authorities instead decided to follow the money. Chasing every platform wasn't working. Instead, they wanted to prevent any more from appearing by starving them. Torrent platforms made money through displaying advertising. If authorities could stop their revenue, they would stop the incentive behind the websites. They created a infringing website list and began pressuring search engines like Google to block customers from accessing these platforms. Partly, this was to decrease traffic, but more importantly, to decrease ad revenue. Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, AOL, and many other companies all promised to help reduce the flow of ad revenue to piracy sites. This certainly hurt torrenting and moved it away from the mainstream, but it wasn't enough to kill it. There were still millions of people torrenting files and finding a way to keep piracy platforms popular. Ironically, the solution was something completely unintentional, one that no one initially saw coming. In the early 2000s, e-commerce was still in its infancy. iTunes launched in 2001, sometime after the launch of platforms like Napster. And it took some time before it saw mainstream adoption. There weren't a lot of legal and affordable alternatives to piracy. Companies were still figuring out how to distribute online, so torrenting was just the easiest way for many to consume media. But that all changed. In 2007, amidst the battle between pirates and law enforcement came the real killer, Netflix. You could suddenly watch anything you wanted for just $9 per month. Naturally, Netflix would explode in popularity.
Da, koliko sad sve košta, koliko sada imamo tih streaming servisa i koliko sad koštaju i šta nam zapravo daju realno. Šta zapravo nude? No neću bre da plaćam ništa. Kakve filmove gluposti. Pogotovo današnje filmove i muziku.
Surpassed 11 million subscribers, which doubled 2 years after that. This is what really killed torrenting. Convenience. The logic is simple. If the legal method is easier and reasonably priced, almost everyone will use the legal service. A small percentage will continue to pirate content to have it for free. But convenience is what drives not just most of our purchases, but our entire behavior. It was suddenly easier to watch shows and movies legally through Netflix than to torrent.
A to, mislim... Lakše je, ne samo zato, nego zato što vaši nalozi su povezani sa svim uređajima koje imate. Znači ja sad mogu da gledam preko kompjutera svog, isto tako sad evo nešto sam počeo tu da gledam, sad moram da idem, putujem, nemam pojma, mogu da nastavim sad ovaj film što sam započeo na kompu, na telefonu, sad sam došao kod nekoga, mogu da prebacim to isto na njegov TV pa da gledamo zajedno. To je ta komfornost neka. Za $10 imaš puno komfora, ne moraš da se cimaš, da skidaš, da rizikuješ viruse ili tako nešto, mislim svega ima tu, naravno da je ovo lakše. Ali, nije besplatno.
Not only that, with the release of more subscription platforms like Spotify, users had little reason to use piracy. Thus began the sharp...
Spotify nikad nisam koristio, ali čuo sam u više navrata da je sjajan program, da je sjajna aplikacija, da je odrađena vrhunski. Iskreno nemam pojma šta da kažem, ali možda bi mogao da je upotrebim.
Decline of torrenting.
The fall.
Torrenting gradually fell out of favor. By 2011, peer-to-peer had fallen to under 19% of internet traffic in North America. By 2013, that traffic was down to just 7.39%. it was on a gradual decline, and with it came the rise of web traffic. In 2015, all of peer-to-peer was estimated to be just 3% of internet traffic. For a comparison, that was about the size of Hulu, which wasn't even the biggest streaming site. This created a snowball effect. There were less people on these platforms, so less people to seed files. Not only was there less traffic, but it was getting harder and harder to torrent altogether. With less traffic came less impact too. In 2017, pirates threatened to release Orange is the New Black on BitTorrent before it was officially released. But despite leaking the show, there was almost zero impact on the official performance. By this point, the users who torrented the show probably weren't going to subscribe to Netflix either way. Today, torrenting has almost disappeared. It still exists, but is a tiny part on the fringe of the internet. Torrenting is simply too inconvenient for most people. Piracy does still exist today, but it's not peer-to-peer, it's illegal streaming, where users can watch content without downloading anything.
Ma da li ste vi normalni, ljudi? Da li ste vi piraterija nikada neće umreti. Znači, samo će pronaći drugi oblik, drugi način da se pojavi. Zašto? Zato što nam je potrebno, brate mili. Zato što ovi što nam nude, eto, taj Netflix i eto i čak i YouTube na kojem radim i bilo koje druge platforme, i oni isto takođe imaju neke svoje ucene i oni su takođe rizični ukoliko znate da prepoznate rizik. Mislim, ko više danas može da izdrži recimo edove na YouTube-u, da gleda tolke silne reklame. Ja ih mrzim iz dna duše i jako radim ovaj posao i potrebni su mi da bi zaradio nešto, ali gledam da ih izblokiram kad god mogu i koliko god mogu. Pošto iskustvo gledanja nečega sa edovima je sasvim drugačije nego bez edova. Sa edovima mi je prosto muka da gledam nešto. Oduvek sam mrzao i na televiziji reklame, pa kad opde 20 minuta, pola sata reklame i zaboravio sam šta sam počeo da gledam. Bukvalno sam zaboravio šta sam počeo da gledam. I onda kad se nastavi neki film, posle pola sata reklama, ono kao, da. Toga recimo nema kad se downloaduje film sa Torenta. I takođe, opet ću reći, ima jako puno tih streaming platformi i sada na jednoj platformi izađe jedan dobar film koji biste voljeli da pogledate, na drugoj platformi izađe drugi, na treći i vi da biste pogledali ta 3 firma morate da uplatite sve 3 platforme, što bi izašlo negde minimum $30 ili evra ili tako nešto, sigurno i više od toga. Na mesečnoj bazi, znači, onda biste se pretplatili, potpisali neki ugovor koji bi morali verovatno da plaćate neko vreme, kao i sa svim ugovorima. I u suštini ono u šta iskreno verujem da će sve ove kompanije sa svim tim platformama nešto da zeznu, da će toliki problem biti da gledamo svoj entertainment na tim platformama, da će nam opet trebati piraterija. I piraterija će se vratiti. Vidjet ćete, pazite šta vam kažem. Možda ne u obliku torrenta, ali će se vratiti u nekom drugom obliku. Ali to je samo moje mišljenje.
Albeit while getting bombarded with advertisements and viruses. With the dozens of streaming services out and prices constantly being hiked, illegal streaming is catching steam. By 2016, illegal streaming claimed 73% of internet piracy. But the same cannot be said about torrenting. Times have changed. Those who grew up around BitTorrent and Napster are much older and less likely to pirate. In the meantime, younger generations grew up in a totally different world.
Da, odrasle su u svetu gde ne moraju da se cimaju, da sve imaju na telefonu i uplaćeno i samo lista i mrš.
Netflix, Spotify and all kinds of convenient and legal methods with no desire or need
Nisu se
to use
snalazili ni jedan
torrenting, or
trenutak u svom
rather,
životu.
without knowing it even existed in the first place. If you're interested in deeper dives, interviews with insiders, and exclusive tech analysis, you can sign up to our free weekly newsletter. Link is below. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.
Današnje generacije nemaju potrebe da gledaju ništa i da se snalaze zato što im je sasvim dovoljan TikTok, uopšte ne moraju da se cimaju. Ali u suštini, eto, čuli smo šta su bili torrenti nekada, kako su pali i gde su sada. I ovako iz ličnog iskustva mogu vam reći da je jako teško doći do torrenta do kojeg želite. Ukoliko ne znaš sa kojih sajtova treba da skidaš, možeš da navučeš neku budalaštinu sa torrentom, pogotovo ukoliko se ne razumeš u to što radiš. vidiš. Ali u tom periodu dok su vladali torrenti, iskreno ja sam imao sve što sam želeo da pogledam, da poslušam, da poigram. Sa bilo kojom aplikacijom da sam poželeo da radim, možeš je naći, skineš, radiš. Nikakva plaćanja, nikakvi subscriptioni. Pogledajte na šta sad liči. Eto sad smo imali skoro o Adobe, smo pričali o njihovim subscriptionima. Jeste videli one cene? Ko to plaća? Kad smo mi bili u situaciji da možemo da izdvojimo takve pare za takav softver? A treba nam je. Ali hoću da čujem vaše mišljenje. Ko je stariji malo ovako, a poslušao ovaj video, da li vam se sviđalo više ono vreme torrenata ili vam se sviđa sada ova komfortnost sa svim ovim silnim platformama? Šta mislite da je bolje? Da li mislite da je piraterija mrtva? Da li mislite da nam je piraterija potrebna, pogotovo nama u Srbiji, ovde koji smo uvek jadni u financijskom smislu? Ili vas to nikad nije ni interesovalo i gledali ste šta vam drugi narežu? Toliko od mene za sada, na vama ostaje da zveknete like ukoliko niste kliknuli na taj like, kliknite i na subscribe takođe ukoliko do sada niste i pretplatite se totalno besplatno na moj kanal. Takođe zveknite ono zvonce i aktivirajte ga da vas obaveštava kad god izađe neki moj novi video. Bićete instantno obavešteni putem vaših notifikacija na vašem smart uređaju. Mi se vidimo u idućoj reakciji, budite mi pozdravljeni, sve naj, ćao!